Imagine a sunny day at a bustling park, filled with laughter and joy, where families gather to enjoy life's simple pleasures. In the midst of it all, a young girl named Ava Bennett, full of determination and heart, navigates her wheelchair toward the playground unaware of the storm awaiting her. What should have been a carefree day turns into a moment of public humiliation, as an encounter with an authoritative figure leaves Ava questioning her place in the world. But this is not just a story of injustice. It is a story of resilience, courage, and the fight for change. When Ava and her father, Malcolm, decide to stand against what happened, they spark a movement that challenges an entire community to reckon with its values. Through heartbreak and hope, conflict and unity, their journey inspires a ripple effect far beyond what they could have imagined. How does Ava find her voice in the face of adversity? What challenges lie ahead for her family and the community? And what surprising acts of kindness lead to a profound transformation? Brookdale Park was alive with the sights and sounds of the annual summer festival. Families meandered between colorful stalls selling everything from hand-stitched crafts to fried treats. Children squealed with delight as they darted toward the bouncy castle or tried their luck at carnival games. The air smelled of cotton candy and roasted peanuts, and the distant hum of a brass band playing upbeat tunes added a festive rhythm to the scene. Among the crowd was 10-year-old Ava Bennett, navigating the gravel paths in her bright green wheelchair. The stickers on her chair reflected her cheerful personality: superheroes, rainbows, and glittering stars. Despite being born with cerebral palsy, Ava never let her condition define her. Her father, Malcolm, had always encouraged her to see herself not as someone limited by her body, but as someone empowered by her spirit. Today was no different. Ava's excitement shone in her eyes as she wheeled toward the playground, her favorite part of the park. Her father trailed behind her at a leisurely pace, a small cup of black coffee in hand. Malcolm was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose years in the army had given him a quiet but commanding presence. His life had been far from easy since retiring. Raising Ava alone after her mother's passing had been a challenge, but he never wavered in his devotion to his daughter. "Do not go too far, Ava," Malcolm called after her, his voice steady but warm. He leaned back on a wooden bench, savoring a rare moment of relaxation. The sun was warm against his skin, and for a moment, he allowed himself to believe the day would be as peaceful as it seemed. Ava reached the playground, her face lit with joy. She loved this place, where children of all ages gathered to swing, climb, and laugh. But as she approached the gate, a shadow fell across her path. Standing there was Officer Patrick O'Connor, arms crossed and his face set in a stern expression. O'Connor was a familiar face in the community, known for his brusque demeanor. To Ava, he looked larger than life, his uniform adding to the air of intimidation. "Excuse me," Ava said politely, stopping her wheelchair at the gate. O'Connor glanced down at her, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked, his voice laced with condescension. "To the playground," Ava replied, her tone steady despite the unease building in her chest. She attempted to maneuver around him, but he shifted his position, blocking her path again. "You do not belong here," he said bluntly, his voice louder now. Several festival goers turned their heads toward the commotion. "This area is for children who can play, not for someone like you." Ava's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Her fingers gripped the sides of her wheelchair as she tried to make sense of his words. She wanted to defend herself, but the lump in her throat made it hard to speak. "Move along," O'Connor barked, his dismissive tone cutting into her like a knife. From his bench, Malcolm noticed the gathering crowd and the tension in the air. He set his coffee down and strode toward the playground, his heart pounding. As he approached, he saw Ava's downcast face and the towering figure of the officer. Anger flared in his chest. "What is going on here?" Malcolm asked, stepping protectively in front of Ava. His deep voice carried an authority that made several onlookers pause. O'Connor turned to him with a scowl. "Just keeping order," he said flatly. "Your daughter does not belong here. She is disrupting the flow." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "My daughter has every right to be here, just like anyone else. She is not disrupting anything." He looked directly at O'Connor, his gaze unwavering. What exactly is the problem? By now, a small crowd had formed, and a few people began recording the scene on their phones. The murmurs of disapproval grew louder. "She is not causing harm to anyone," said a young mother holding the hand of her toddler. "You are the one causing a disruption." O'Connor shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the phones pointed in his direction. He muttered something under his breath and stepped aside, but his glare lingered on Ava. Malcolm knelt beside his daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, baby girl?" he asked softly. Ava nodded, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Why did he say I do not belong here?" she whispered. Malcolm's heart ached at her question. "Sometimes people say hurtful things because they do not understand," he said gently. "But you do not have to listen to them. You have just as much right to enjoy this day as anyone else." As the crowd dispersed, a middle-aged man approached them. "I saw what happened," he said, his tone sincere. "That was unacceptable. I am so sorry your daughter had to go through that." "Thank you," Malcolm replied, his voice tinged with gratitude. The man handed him a card. "I work with a local advocacy group. If you ever want to talk or share your story, please reach out." Malcolm pocketed the card, unsure if he would ever use it. For now, all he wanted was to help Ava enjoy the rest of the day. As they left the playground, Ava spotted a girl her age holding a balloon. The girl smiled and walked over. "Hi," she said shyly. "I saw what happened. I think your chair is really cool." Ava blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said, a small smile breaking through her earlier sadness. The girl handed Ava the balloon. "Here, I have another one at home." Ava accepted it, her smile growing brighter. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger this time. As they made their way back to the festival's main area, Malcolm looked down at his daughter, her face lit with the joy he loved to see. In that moment, he realized that even in the face of cruelty, small acts of kindness could shine brightly, leaving ripples of hope in their wake. The atmosphere at home that evening was subdued. Ava sat at the dining table, absently twirling a strand of her dark, curly hair. Her balloon from the festival bobbed gently at her side, tied to her wheelchair. It was a reminder of the day's kindness, but also of the humiliation she had endured. Malcolm stood by the kitchen counter, his arms crossed and his jaw set. He had spent years learning to channel his emotions, but this time it was different. The image of Officer O'Connor towering over Ava, spewing his hurtful words, replayed in his mind like a looping nightmare. He knew what it felt like to be judged by the color of his skin or by the way he carried himself. But seeing his daughter face such cruelty stung deeper than any insult he had ever borne. "You okay, kiddo?" Malcolm asked, his voice softening as he sat across from her. Ava shrugged, keeping her eyes fixed on the balloon. "I guess," she replied quietly. "But why does he hate me? I didn't do anything wrong." Malcolm took a deep breath. He wanted to give her a simple answer, something comforting, but he also wanted to be truthful. "Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand," he said. "They see someone who looks different or moves differently, and instead of being kind, they choose to be mean. It's not about you, Ava. It's about them. But it feels like it's about me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Malcolm reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I know it does," he said. "And I wish I could protect you from people like that forever. But I promise, no matter what, we will face it together. You're not alone in this." Ava nodded, her lips pressing into a determined line. "Thanks, Dad." As they sat in silence, Malcolm's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket to see a message from an old friend, Greg Lawson. The two had served together in the Army, but Greg had transitioned into activism after retiring, focusing on community issues like housing and equity. Attached to the message was a link to a video. Curious, Malcolm tapped the link. The video opened to a grainy but clear recording of the incident at the park. Someone had uploaded it to social media, and it was already gaining traction. The caption read, "Officer humiliates disabled girl at public park. Is this what our community stands for?" Malcolm's stomach tightened as he watched the familiar scene unfold on the screen. O'Connor's dismissive tone, Ava's quiet bravery, the crowd's murmurs, it was all there, raw and unfiltered. The comment section was flooded with responses, ranging from outrage to heartbreak. "How could someone do this to a child?" One comment read, This is why we need accountability in law enforcement, said another. But not all the comments were supportive. Some were cruel, mocking Ava or defending O'Connor. Malcolm's grip on his phone tightened, but he forced himself to focus on the positive messages. There were far more people standing up for Ava than tearing her down. "Dad, what's that?" Ava asked, noticing the shift in his expression. "It's a video of what happened today," he said, turning the screen toward her. "It's going viral." Ava hesitated before looking at the screen. As the video played, her eyes widened. "People are watching this?" she asked. "Yes," Malcolm said. "And a lot of them are on your side." Ava's expression shifted from fear to cautious curiosity. "Really? Really?" Malcolm said, showing her the supportive comments. "See? People care about what happened to you. They're angry, just like I am." Ava read the messages silently, her face softening. "I didn't know so many people would care." Before Malcolm could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Greg. "Malcolm, I saw the video," Greg said, his voice urgent. "That was Ava, wasn't it?" "It was," Malcolm replied, glancing at his daughter, who was now scrolling through the comments. "I'm so sorry that happened," Greg said. "But listen, this could be a moment to make some real change. A few community leaders are organizing a meeting tomorrow night to discuss this. I think you and Ava should come." Malcolm hesitated. Part of him wanted to shield Ava from further attention, but another part of him recognized the importance of standing up for her. "Let me think about it," he said. "I'll let you know." After hanging up, Malcolm sat quietly, weighing his options. Ava looked up from the phone. "Who was that?" "A friend of mine," Malcolm said. "He wants us to go to a meeting tomorrow. A lot of people want to talk about what happened and how to stop it from happening again." Ava's brows knitted together. "Do we have to?" "No," Malcolm said gently. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. But if we go, it could help other kids who might be treated the same way." Ava thought for a moment, her fingers absently spinning the wheel of her chair. "Will you be there with me?" she asked. "Of course," Malcolm said. "Every step of the way." She nodded slowly. "Okay, let's go." The next evening, Malcolm and Ava arrived at the local community center. The parking lot was packed, and the sound of voices spilled out through the open doors. Inside, rows of chairs were filled with people of all ages and backgrounds. A podium stood at the front of the room, and a projector displayed the now infamous video on a loop. As they entered, a ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Several people approached them, offering words of support. "You're so brave, young lady," said an elderly woman with kind eyes. "Thank you for standing up to that man." Ava managed a small smile. "Thank you." When the meeting began, Malcolm was invited to speak. He stood at the podium, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. "My name is Malcolm Bennett," he began, "and this is my daughter, Ava. Yesterday, she was humiliated by someone who was supposed to serve and protect. But this isn't just about one bad moment. It's about something much bigger, something that affects many people in our community." The room was silent as Malcolm spoke, his voice carrying the strength of a father and the conviction of a leader. He shared Ava's story, emphasizing her resilience and the need for systemic change. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. As the night went on, others shared their own stories of discrimination and hardship. Ava listened closely, her fears slowly giving way to a sense of belonging. She realized she was not alone. On the way home, she looked up at her father. "I'm glad we went," she said. "So am I," Malcolm replied. "This is just the beginning, Ava. Together, we can make a difference." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Malcolm brewed coffee. Ava sat at the table, scribbling in a notebook. Her curls framed her face, and though her brow was furrowed in concentration, Malcolm could see the subtle shift in her demeanor. Last night's meeting had left an impression on her. She had seemed lighter afterward, as if a small part of the burden she carried had been lifted by the kindness of strangers. "What are you working on?" Malcolm asked, setting a mug of steaming coffee in front of himself as he sat down. "Just writing," Ava replied, not looking up. "I'm trying to put into words how I felt yesterday. I don't want to forget it." Malcolm leaned forward. "You're turning into quite the storyteller." Ava shrugged but smiled faintly. "It helps me figure out what to say." Malcolm sipped his coffee, letting her focus. The truth was, he felt a quiet pride seeing her process everything so thoughtfully. Despite her young age, Ava had a depth that often surprised him. She was resilient, yes, but last night's meeting had introduced something new, a sense of connection, of knowing she wasn't alone in her struggles. Malcolm's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Greg. Great turnout last night. Let's keep building momentum. Maybe Ava would like to speak at the next meeting? Malcolm hesitated, reading the message twice. He glanced at Ava, who was still writing intently. Would it be too much to ask her to speak? Or would it empower her to know her voice mattered? Hey, kiddo, he said gently. Greg just messaged me. He was wondering if you might want to speak at the next meeting. Share your story. Ava froze, her pencil hovering over the page. Speak? Like, in front of people? Only if you want to, Malcolm assured her. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. Ava chewed her lip, staring at the notebook. What if I mess up? What if they don't listen? Malcolm reached across the table, placing a steady hand over hers. You're braver than you think, Ava. And if you decide to do this, I'll help you every step of the way. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes flicking back to the page. Okay, I'll think about it. That afternoon, Malcolm decided to take Ava to her favorite spot in the neighborhood, a small, quiet library nestled between a coffee shop and a thrift store. It was a place they had visited often when she was younger, a haven of calm where she could lose herself in books about superheroes and adventurers. As they rolled up to the front door, an older woman with silver hair and round glasses opened it for them. There you go, dear, she said warmly, holding the door wide. Thank you, Ava said, her voice small but sincere. Anytime, the woman replied, smiling at Malcolm before stepping aside. Inside, Ava's face lit up at the sight of the children's section, still adorned with colorful posters and beanbags. Malcolm watched as she wheeled herself over to a shelf, scanning the titles with practiced ease. He found himself reflecting on how these small moments, the unspoken kindness of strangers, the comfort of familiar places had a way of stitching together hope in even the most challenging times. Ava selected a book and wheeled over to one of the tables. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the illustrations. Malcolm took a seat across from her, scrolling through emails on his phone while keeping an eye on her. For the first time in days, she seemed completely at ease. Excuse me, a voice said, breaking the quiet. Malcolm looked up to see a boy, about Ava's age, standing a few feet away. He was clutching a book and shifting nervously from foot to foot. Yes, Ava asked, looking at him curiously. I saw you at the park the other day, the boy said, his cheeks flushing. What happened wasn't right. I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to go through that. Ava blinked, momentarily stunned. Thank you, she said after a pause. The boy nodded, then hesitated. Do you want to read this with me? It's about a girl who saves her town. I think you'd like it. Malcolm watched as Ava's eyes softened. She nodded. Sure, I'd like that. The two sat at the table, sharing the book and discussing the story in quiet voices. Malcolm leaned back, marveling at the simplicity of the moment. The kindness of one child, so unassuming yet so profound, was helping Ava heal in ways he hadn't expected. By evening, Ava seemed more like herself, her shoulders less tense and her smile easier. As Malcolm prepared dinner, she sat at the counter with her notebook. Dad, she asked suddenly. Yeah, I think I want to speak at the next meeting, she said, her voice steady. I've been thinking about it, and I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. Malcolm put down the spoon he was holding and turned to her. Are you sure? It's a big step. I'm sure, Ava said. If I can help people understand what it feels like, maybe they'll think twice before they treat someone the way that officer treated me. Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. He walked over and pulled her into a hug. I'm so proud of you, Ava. We'll practice together, okay? You'll be ready. Ava hugged him back tightly. Thanks, Dad. The following days were filled with preparation. Malcolm helped Ava draft her speech, encouraging her to write from the heart. They practiced in the living room, with Malcolm sitting in the audience and clapping enthusiastically after every run-through. You're going to knock their socks off, he said one evening, grinning as Ava finished a particularly strong delivery. "You think so?" she asked, her confidence growing with each attempt. "I know so," Malcolm replied. "You're a natural." The night of the meeting arrived faster than they expected. As they entered the community center, Ava gripped the armrests of her wheelchair tightly, her nerves evident. Malcolm placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," he said. "Just remember, you're not alone. Everyone here is rooting for you." Ava nodded, taking a deep breath as they rolled toward the front. When it was her turn, Malcolm gave her a thumbs up, stepping aside to let her take center stage. The room fell silent as Ava began to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but as she shared her story, how the officer's words had hurt her, how she had felt small and unimportant, and how kindness had begun to rebuild her confidence, her tone grew stronger. She spoke not just for herself, but for every child who had ever felt invisible or unwelcome. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Tears filled Malcolm's eyes as he watched his daughter smile, her bravery shining brighter than ever. That night, as they drove home, Ava looked out the window, her heart lighter. "Dad," she said softly, "I think I can make a difference." "You already have," Malcolm replied, his voice filled with pride. "And this is just the beginning." The applause from the meeting still echoed in Ava's mind the next morning. As she sat at the breakfast table, she replayed the moment over and over, marveling at how her voice, once small and hesitant, had carried across the room with strength and purpose. But the glow of triumph was fleeting. When Ava checked her phone, a flood of notifications greeted her, some filled with words of encouragement and others laced with venom. Malcolm noticed her troubled expression as he poured cereal into a bowl. "Something wrong, kiddo?" he asked. Ava hesitated, holding up her phone. "People are talking about me online," she said. "Some of it's good, but some of it isn't." Malcolm took the phone and scrolled through the comments. His jaw tightened at the hateful remarks, but he forced himself to focus on the positive. "You see these?" he said, pointing to the messages of support. "That's what matters. People believe in you, Ava. Don't let the others get in your head." Ava nodded, but the words still stung. "Why do they hate me so much, Dad? They don't even know me." Malcolm sat down beside her. "Some people hate what they don't understand," he said gently. "But remember, their hate says more about them than it does about you. Focus on the ones who see you for who you are." Later that day, Malcolm received a call from Greg, who was organizing the next steps for their community effort. "We're gaining traction," Greg said. "Local businesses are offering to sponsor events, and a journalist wants to interview you and Ava. This could really help the movement." Malcolm rubbed the back of his neck, unsure. "I don't want to put too much pressure on Ava." "I get that," Greg said, "but it's important for people to see the faces behind the story. You can set the boundaries. Think about it." After the call, Malcolm explained the opportunity to Ava. Her face lit up at the idea of reaching more people, but dimmed just as quickly. "What if I mess up?" she asked. "You won't," Malcolm reassured her. "Just be yourself. That's all you need to do." Ava thought for a moment before nodding. "Okay, let's do it." The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Malcolm and Ava sat down with the journalist, a kind woman named Sarah with glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She asked thoughtful questions, giving Ava space to share her experiences. Ava spoke about the park incident, her feelings of isolation, and how the community's support had given her hope. "You're very brave, Ava," Sarah said as they wrapped up. "Sharing your story like this is going to help a lot of people." Ava blushed, but her smile was genuine. "Thank you." Not everyone was supportive of their growing visibility. At school, Ava overheard whispers from some classmates who claimed she was making a big deal out of nothing or trying to get attention. It hurt, but she tried to focus on the good. Her teacher, Mrs. Carter, encouraged her to write an essay for the school newsletter about her experience, and Ava poured her heart into it. When the essay was published, it sparked heated discussions among students and parents. Some praised Ava for her courage, while others argued that she was painting the town in a bad light. Ava felt the weight of these opinions, but Malcolm reminded her of her purpose. "Change isn't easy, Ava," he said one evening as they sat on the porch. "But the important things never are. You're planting seeds. It might take time for them to grow, but they will." The tension came to a head during a school assembly where Ava was invited to speak about inclusivity. She rolled onto the stage, her palms sweating, but as she scanned the crowd, she spotted familiar faces, her friends, her teacher, and even some of the parents from the community meetings. Their presence steadied her. "I used to think being different made me less," Ava began, her voice clear and steady. "But I've learned that being different makes me strong. It gives me a reason to stand up and speak out, not just for myself, but for everyone who feels unseen." When she finished, the gymnasium erupted in applause. For the first time, Ava felt truly heard, not just by those who supported her, but by those who had doubted her, too. As Malcolm picked her up after school, Ava's face was a mix of relief and pride. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good," Ava said. "I think some of them actually listened." "They did," Malcolm said, glancing at the parents chatting outside. "You're making a difference, Ava." That evening, as they sat together watching the news, a story about the growing movement appeared. The reporter highlighted the community rallies, the push for police reform, and the faces at the heart of it all, Ava and Malcolm Bennett. "This is just the beginning," Malcolm said, looking at Ava. "You're changing hearts, kiddo. And that's how we change the world." Ava leaned against his shoulder, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." The morning after their story aired on the news, Malcolm and Ava woke to a flurry of messages. Texts, emails, and social media notifications poured in, many from strangers who had seen the broadcast. Most were kind, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Others shared their own experiences of injustice, thanking Ava for giving them hope. Malcolm scrolled through the messages over breakfast, occasionally reading one aloud. "Listen to this one, Ava," he said, holding his phone up. "Your courage inspired my daughter to speak out about how she's been treated at school. Thank you for showing her that her voice matters." Ava smiled around a mouthful of cereal. "That's nice." "It is," Malcolm said, pride warming his tone. But not every message was positive. A few were cruel, accusing them of seeking attention or exaggerating what happened. Malcolm chose not to share those with Ava, though he kept them in mind, knowing the road they were on would be far from smooth. At school, Ava noticed a change. Some students who had ignored her before now approached her with curiosity or admiration. Her classmates asked questions about her wheelchair, her experiences, and the speech she had given at the assembly. Ava answered cautiously at first, but grew more confident as she realized they were genuinely interested. During lunch, Ava sat with her best friend, Lily, when a group of older kids approached. Ava tensed, bracing herself for taunts, but to her surprise, the leader of the group, a tall boy named Caleb, spoke kindly. "Hey, Ava," Caleb said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I just wanted to say, that speech you gave was really cool. It made me think about some things I never noticed before." Ava blinked in surprise. "Thanks," she said, her voice tentative. Caleb nodded and glanced at Lily. "You've got a pretty awesome friend," he said before walking away with his group. Lily grinned. "Did you hear that? Caleb Andrews just called you awesome." Ava laughed, her cheeks flushing. "I guess I did." At home, Malcolm was busy working with Greg and other community members to organize the next rally. The movement was gaining momentum, and Malcolm had taken on a leadership role, coordinating with local activists and city officials. It was fulfilling work, but it left little time for rest. Still, he made sure to carve out moments for Ava, whether it was helping her with homework or watching her favorite superhero movies together. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Ava looked up from her sketch pad. "Dad, yeah," Malcolm said, glancing over from his laptop. "Do you think things are actually going to change?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Malcolm set his laptop aside and leaned forward. "I do," he said. "It might take time, but I can see it happening already. People are talking about things they used to ignore. And you're a big part of that, Ava." Ava smiled faintly. "It just feels slow." "It is," Malcolm admitted. "But every big change starts with small steps. You've already taken some of the hardest ones." The next rally was scheduled for the weekend, and this time, Ava was invited to speak again. Unlike before, she felt a mix of excitement and determination instead of nerves. Over the next few days, she and Malcolm worked together on her speech, fine-tuning the words until they felt just right. When Saturday arrived, the city square was buzzing with activity. People of all ages gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "Inclusion Matters." Malcolm and Ava were greeted warmly as they arrived, with several people stopping to thank them for their efforts. As Ava rolled onto the stage, the crowd quieted, their attention focused on her. She took a deep breath, clutching the edges of her chair for support. "My name is Ava Bennett," she began, her voice steady. "And I'm here because I believe we can be better." She spoke about her experience at the park, the pain of feeling excluded, and the unexpected kindness that had helped her heal. She shared her hopes for a future where no child would feel the way she had that day. And as she spoke, the crowd listened intently. By the time she finished, the square erupted in applause. Malcolm joined her on stage, his hand resting on her shoulder as they waved to the crowd. The energy in the air was electric, filled with a sense of unity and purpose. That evening, as they returned home, Ava sat by the window, watching the city lights blur past. "Dad," she said softly. "Yeah," Malcolm replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Do you think people will remember this? Or will they forget after a while?" Malcolm considered her question carefully. "Some people might forget," he said honestly, "but others won't. You've already made a mark, Ava, and as long as we keep going, the impact will grow." Ava nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I want to keep going." Malcolm smiled. "We will." The days following the rally brought more attention to their cause. News outlets picked up the story, and more people reached out to offer their support. Local businesses began displaying signs of solidarity in their windows, and a school art teacher organized a mural project inspired by Ava's story. But not everyone was pleased with the movement's success. Malcolm received an anonymous letter in the mail one afternoon, warning him to back off and stop stirring the pot. He crumpled it in his hand, his jaw tightening. "What is that?" Ava asked, noticing his reaction. "Nothing you need to worry about," Malcolm said, tossing the letter into the trash. "We're not stopping." Ava nodded, her expression resolute. "Good." One afternoon, Ava was at the park with Lily when a woman approached them. She was in her 40s with short brown hair and a kind smile. "Hi," she said. "Are you Ava Bennett?" "Yes," Ava replied, glancing at Lily nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "My son has autism, and he's faced a lot of the same struggles you've talked about. Hearing your story has given us hope. You're making a difference." Ava's heart swelled. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." As the woman walked away, Lily grinned. "You're like a celebrity now." Ava laughed. "Not quite." But as she looked around the park, the same place where she had once been humiliated, she felt a sense of peace. Things weren't perfect, but they were changing, and she was part of that change. The momentum of the movement had reached a tipping point. Ava's story and the rallies had sparked discussions across the city. People who had once been silent began to share their experiences of mistreatment, and demands for accountability grew louder. Malcolm could see the shift in the way people talked about injustice, not just as an abstract problem, but as something real and urgent. But progress was slow. Despite the public outcry, the police department's internal investigation into Officer O'Connor had stalled. Official statements claimed they were conducting a thorough review, but Malcolm suspected they were hoping the controversy would fade with time. "It's like they're waiting for everyone to forget," Malcolm said one evening, pacing the living room, "hoping people will lose interest and move on." Ava looked up from her sketch pad, where she had been doodling superheroes. "We're not going to forget," she said firmly. Malcolm paused, his eyes softening. "You're right, kiddo. We're not." The next morning, Malcolm met with Greg and other community leaders at a local coffee shop. The group was diverse teachers, activists, business owners, and even a retired judge. They had all come together with a shared goal: to ensure justice for Ava and to push for systemic changes. "We need to apply more pressure," Greg said, leaning forward in his chair. "Publicly, peacefully but visibly." "I agree," Malcolm said. "If we let this sit too long, it'll fade. Ava deserves better than that." The group decided to organize a march through the city, culminating in a rally at City Hall. The goal was clear: demand transparency in the investigation and advocate for reforms, including sensitivity training for officers and an independent oversight committee. As plans for the march took shape, Ava found herself more involved than ever. She joined Malcolm at meetings, offering her perspective on what messages would resonate. Her confidence had grown since her first speech, and people in the movement had come to admire her insight and determination. One afternoon, while practicing a new speech in the living room, Ava hesitated. "Dad, what if they still don't listen?" she asked. Malcolm crouched beside her, resting a hand on her arm. "Sometimes change takes time, Ava, but every voice we raise brings us closer. And your voice is one of the strongest out there." Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll keep speaking." The day of the march arrived under a clear blue sky. Hundreds of people gathered in the city square, carrying signs that read "Justice for Ava" and "Reform Now." The energy was palpable, a mix of anger, hope, and determination. Ava sat beside Malcolm near the front of the procession, her green wheelchair adorned with a banner that read, "Stand up for what's right." As they began to move through the streets, chants echoed off the buildings. "No justice, no peace. Protect all, not the few." People leaned out of windows to cheer, while others joined the procession as it passed by. Ava felt a thrill of empowerment as she looked around at the sea of people walking for a cause she had helped ignite. When they reached City Hall, a stage had been set up for speakers. Ava was the last to address the crowd. As she wheeled onto the stage, the chants quieted, and all eyes turned to her. She gripped the edges of her chair tightly, taking a deep breath before speaking. "When I was little," she began, her voice steady, "my dad always told me that being different wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. But sometimes the world doesn't see it that way." She recounted the park incident and the pain of being dismissed, but she also spoke about the unexpected kindness she had experienced, the people who had supported her, listened to her, and stood with her. "Together," she concluded, "we can make sure no one else feels small or invisible. Change starts with us." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers carrying across the square. Ava looked out at the sea of faces and felt a surge of hope. They were listening. They were with her. The march made headlines across the city and even gained attention from national media. Ava's story was featured on several major news outlets, and the pressure on the police department intensified. The department announced a public hearing to address the investigation's findings, a move that many saw as a direct result of the movement's efforts. But with the attention came resistance. Malcolm began receiving anonymous messages warning him to back off. He showed the messages to Greg, who advised him to stay vigilant but not to let the threats deter him. "They're scared," Greg said. "Scared of losing the control they've abused. That means we're doing something right." Meanwhile, Ava continued to receive messages of support from across the country. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a young boy named Ethan, who had cerebral palsy like Ava. "Dear Ava," the letter read, "I saw you on the news, and I think you're amazing. Sometimes kids at my school make fun of me because I walk funny, but when I heard your story, I felt brave. Thank you for helping me believe in myself." Ava read the letter twice, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad," she said, holding it up, "this is why we can't stop." Malcolm smiled, pride shining in his expression. "That's right. We're just getting started." As the public hearing approached, Malcolm and Ava prepared for what they hoped would be a turning point. They knew the fight wasn't over, but they also knew they weren't alone. Their voices had joined a growing chorus calling for justice, and together, they were determined to be heard. The days leading up to the public hearing were filled with anticipation and tension. Malcolm worked tirelessly with Greg and the other organizers, coordinating logistics and preparing statements. Ava, too, was busy, revising her speech and practicing with her father in the evenings. But beneath their determination, a heavy cloud of uncertainty loomed. One evening, as Malcolm returned from a late meeting, he found Ava sitting in her room, staring at her speech. The paper was crumpled at the edges, evidence of her repeated revisions. She looked up as he entered, her expression conflicted. "Hey, kiddo," Malcolm said gently. "What's on your mind?" Ava hesitated, then sighed. "What if it doesn't work, Dad? What if they don't care about what we say?" Malcolm pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "It's normal to feel that way," he said. "But remember, we're not doing this alone. Look at all the people who've joined us, the ones who've stood by you. They believe in this just like we do. Ava nodded but still seemed uncertain. Sometimes it feels like it's too big, she admitted. Like no matter how loud we are, nothing will change. Malcolm leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Ava, change is hard. It takes time and a lot of voices coming together. But your voice? It's one of the strongest I've ever heard, and it's making a difference. For the first time that evening, Ava smiled. Thanks, Dad, she said softly. I'll keep trying. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the nervous energy that filled the Bennett's home. Malcolm and Ava dressed carefully, their outfits simple but polished. As they drove to the city courthouse, Ava clutched her speech tightly, her hands trembling slightly. You've got this, Malcolm said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Just remember everything we practiced. Ava nodded, though she didn't speak. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, hope, and determination, all battling for space. When they arrived, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, activists, and supporters. A group of children held a banner that read, "We stand with Ava." Seeing their bright smiles gave Ava a surge of courage. Inside, the hearing room was packed. City officials sat at a long table at the front, their expressions a mix of seriousness and caution. Officer O'Connor sat on one side of the room, flanked by his lawyer. He avoided looking at Ava, his face pale and drawn. The first speakers included Malcolm, Greg, and several community leaders. They spoke about the importance of accountability and shared other stories of mistreatment by those in power. Each testimony built upon the last, painting a clear picture of the systemic issues that had long gone unchecked. When Ava's name was called, Malcolm gave her an encouraging nod. She wheeled herself to the front, the weight of countless eyes on her small frame. Taking a deep breath, she unfolded her speech. My name is Ava Bennett, she began, her voice quiet but steady. I'm 10 years old, and I never thought I'd have to speak about something like this. She recounted the day at the park, the humiliation she had felt, and the kindness that had followed. Her voice wavered briefly as she described the impact of the community's support, but she pressed on. I'm not here just for myself, she said, her tone growing stronger. I'm here for every kid who feels like they don't belong. We deserve better. And I hope today you'll listen not just to me, but to everyone who's been brave enough to speak out. The room was silent for a moment after she finished, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then a ripple of applause broke out, growing louder as more people joined in. Ava's cheeks flushed, but this time it was with pride. After the hearing, Malcolm and Ava stepped outside into the brisk afternoon air. Supporters surrounded them, offering hugs, high fives, and words of encouragement. Ava's smile grew as she realized how much her words had resonated. You were incredible, Malcolm said, placing a hand on her shoulder. I couldn't be prouder. Ava beamed up at him. Thanks, Dad. I'm glad I did it. But the day wasn't without challenges. Later that evening, Malcolm received a call from Greg. Malcolm, we've got a problem, Greg said grimly. A few people are pushing back hard. There's a smear campaign starting online, accusing us of exaggerating the incident. Malcolm clenched his jaw. I figured this would happen. What do we do? We stay calm, Greg replied. We keep our focus and let the truth speak for itself. They're trying to distract us, but we won't let them. When Malcolm explained the situation to Ava, her initial confidence faltered. Why would they lie about us? She asked. Because they're scared of the truth, Malcolm said. But the truth is on our side, Ava. And that's what matters. Over the next few days, the smear campaign gained traction among a small but vocal group. Malcolm and Greg worked tirelessly to counter the false narratives, sharing evidence and testimonies that supported their cause. Despite the backlash, the majority of the community continued to rally behind Ava. One unexpected ally came in the form of Mrs. Carter, Ava's teacher. She invited Ava to present her story to the school board, emphasizing the importance of inclusivity in education. The meeting was a success, with the board agreeing to implement new initiatives to support students with disabilities. That's another step forward, Malcolm said as they drove home that evening. You're making a real impact, Ava. Ava smiled, her resolve strengthening with each small victory. "I won't stop," she said firmly. "Not until things really change." Malcolm reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's my girl." Though the journey was far from over, the Bennetts knew they were building something meaningful brick by brick, step by step. And no matter how difficult the road became, they would face it together, knowing their voices were part of something much bigger than themselves. The courthouse hearing had left a lasting impression on the city. Ava's speech, in particular, had struck a chord with many who had been hesitant to take a stand. Her story was no longer just a local issue. It had become a symbol of resilience and the need for systemic change. Malcolm noticed the shift almost immediately. Calls began pouring in from neighboring cities, advocacy groups, and even a few state officials. People wanted to support the movement, to learn from it, and to amplify its message. But with the growing momentum came heightened scrutiny. "Things are heating up," Greg said during their weekly meeting. The group of organizers had gathered at a local community center, their usual spot for planning and strategizing. "We've got more eyes on us than ever, which is a good thing. But it also means we need to stay sharp." Malcolm nodded. "We've come this far because we've stuck to the truth. That's not going to change." The room murmured in agreement. But as the meeting continued, Malcolm's mind kept drifting to Ava. He worried about the toll all of this was taking on her. She had been brave, but even the strongest hearts needed rest. At home, Ava sat on the living room floor, flipping through a scrapbook she had started. It was filled with clippings from newspapers, printed emails, and handwritten notes from supporters. One letter, in particular, caught her attention. It was from a girl named Emily in a neighboring town. "Dear Ava," it began. "I use a wheelchair too, and I've always felt like I didn't belong. But when I saw you on the news, I realized I'm not alone. Thank you for being brave enough to speak out. You've helped me feel brave too." Ava traced her fingers over the words, her chest swelling with a mix of pride and responsibility. She wanted to keep fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible. "Dad?" she called, looking up as Malcolm entered the room. "Yeah, kiddo," he replied, sitting beside her on the floor. "Do you think we're actually changing things?" she asked, holding up the letter. Malcolm smiled. "I do. It's not always easy to see right away, but letters like that, they're proof. You're inspiring people. Ava." Ava nodded, her confidence bolstered. "Then I'll keep going." The next major event was a town hall meeting organized by the mayor's office. It was meant to address the growing demands for accountability and reform. Malcolm and Ava were both invited to speak, along with several other community leaders. The night of the meeting, the auditorium was packed. Rows of chairs were filled with city officials, police representatives, and citizens eager to hear the discussions. Malcolm and Ava sat near the front, their presence a quiet but powerful reminder of why they were all there. When it was her turn to speak, Ava wheeled herself to the podium. The microphone was adjusted to her height, and she took a deep breath before beginning. "I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice steady despite the size of the crowd. "But after what happened to me, I realized I couldn't stay quiet. I'm here because I believe we can be better not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't matter." She went on to share her vision for change. A community where people were treated with dignity, where differences were celebrated instead of dismissed. Her words were met with thunderous applause, and Malcolm felt a swell of pride as he watched his daughter stand tall in her own way. The meeting sparked a series of changes. The mayor's office announced the formation of an independent oversight committee to investigate allegations of misconduct within the police department. Training programs for officers, focusing on inclusivity and sensitivity, were also proposed. But not everyone was pleased with the developments. Officer O'Connor's supporters grew louder, claiming he was being unfairly targeted. Tensions flared on social media, with heated debates dominating local forums and comment sections. "It's frustrating," Malcolm admitted during a quiet evening at home. "No matter how much evidence we present, there are always going to be people who refuse to see the truth." Ava looked up from her homework. "But we're not doing this for them, right? We're doing it for the ones who do see the truth." Malcolm smiled. "You're absolutely right." One evening, a surprising act of kindness broke through the noise. A local bakery owner, who had been following Ava's story, reached out to the Bennetts with a heartfelt gesture. She invited them to the bakery, where she unveiled a new display. Cupcakes decorated with empowering messages like, "You belong and stand tall." A portion of the sales would be donated to advocacy groups supporting inclusivity and reform. "This is amazing," Ava said, her eyes lighting up as she read the messages. "Thank you so much." The bakery owner smiled. "You've inspired so many of us, Ava. This is just a small way to give back." As they left the bakery that evening, Ava held a box of cupcakes in her lap, her heart full. It was moments like this that reminded her why the fight mattered. The following week, Ava was invited to visit a local middle school to share her story. At first, she hesitated. Speaking to adults was one thing, but talking to kids her own age felt more daunting. What if they didn't take her seriously? "You've already spoken to huge crowds," Malcolm reminded her. "You can do this." And so, Ava found herself in a brightly lit auditorium, facing rows of curious students. She started nervously, but as she spoke about her experiences and the importance of standing up for others, she saw the students lean in, their expressions shifting to admiration. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several students approached her afterward, asking questions and sharing their own stories. Ava left the school feeling lighter, knowing she had connected with them. Back at home that evening, Malcolm found Ava sitting by the window, gazing at the stars. "What's on your mind?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I think things are really changing," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been through something like this." Malcolm nodded, placing an arm around her shoulders. "They are. And it's because of people like you, people brave enough to speak out." Ava smiled, leaning into his side. For the first time in a long while, the future felt full of possibilities. The weeks following Ava's visit to the middle school were a whirlwind of activity. The Independent Oversight Committee had officially begun its investigation, and the community's efforts were gaining recognition beyond the city. Malcolm and Ava found themselves busier than ever, juggling meetings, interviews, and rallies. Through it all, Ava remained steadfast, her resolve growing stronger with each step forward. One chilly morning, Malcolm received a phone call from a reporter at a national news outlet. "Mr. Bennett, we've been following your story," the voice on the other end said. "We'd like to feature you and Ava in an upcoming segment about community-led movements for change. Would you be willing to participate?" Malcolm hesitated, glancing at Ava, who was scribbling in her notebook at the kitchen table. The attention had brought both opportunities and challenges, but he knew this could amplify their message even further. "I'll discuss it with my daughter," Malcolm said. "But thank you for considering us." When he explained the opportunity to Ava, her face lit up with excitement. "We should do it, Dad," she said. "If more people hear about what happened, maybe it will help them stand up, too." Malcolm smiled, admiring her courage. "All right, kiddo, let's do it." The interview took place later that week. The reporter, a kind woman named Julia, arrived at their home with a small camera crew. She spent time talking with Ava and Malcolm, asking thoughtful questions about their journey and the impact of their advocacy. "What do you hope will come from all of this?" Julia asked Ava as the interview neared its conclusion. Ava thought for a moment before answering. "I hope people realize that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. And I hope other kids like me know they're not alone." Julia smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful message, Ava. Thank you for sharing your story." When the segment aired, it struck a chord with viewers across the country. Messages of support flooded in from people who had been moved by Ava's bravery. The attention also put more pressure on local officials to act, forcing them to address the investigation with renewed urgency. As the Oversight Committee's work progressed, Malcolm received an update from Greg. "The investigation into Officer O'Connor is wrapping up," Greg said. "From what I've heard, the findings aren't going to be in his favor." Malcolm exhaled, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over him. "It's about time," he said. "But this isn't just about him. We need to make sure the changes stick." "Agreed," Greg said. "Let's keep the momentum going." The announcement of the investigation's findings came on a crisp Friday afternoon. The committee released a statement condemning O'Connor's actions, citing a pattern of misconduct that had gone unaddressed for years. He was formally removed from duty, and the department pledged to implement mandatory sensitivity training and establish better oversight protocols. When Ava heard the news, she felt a surge of relief. "Does this mean it's over?" she asked Malcolm as they sat on the couch that evening. "It's a big step," Malcolm said, "but there's still work to do. This is about more than just one person. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Ava nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Then we'll keep going." The changes in the city didn't stop there. Inspired by the movement, local businesses and schools began hosting workshops on inclusivity and empathy. The mural project at Ava's school was completed, its vibrant colors and powerful messages serving as a daily reminder of the community's strength. One day, as Ava rolled past the mural on her way to class, she noticed a group of younger students admiring it. "That's Ava Bennett," one of them whispered. "She's the reason they made this." Ava smiled shyly, her heart swelling with pride. She had never imagined her story would inspire so many people, but it was a responsibility she carried with quiet determination. At home, Malcolm found himself reflecting on how far they had come. The house was quieter now, the constant buzz of meetings and rallies giving way to moments of peace. One evening, as he sat on the porch, Ava joined him, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked, her voice soft. Malcolm looked at her, his heart full. "I think we've done a lot," he said, "but the fight for change never really ends. The important thing is that we've started something that will keep growing, even if we're not always leading it." Ava nodded, leaning against his side. "I'm glad we did it, Dad, even when it was hard." "So am I," Malcolm said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And I couldn't have done it without you." As the weeks went on, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ava returned to her favorite activities, spending more time at the library and drawing superheroes in her sketchpad. But she never forgot the lessons she had learned or the people she had inspired. And neither did Malcolm. One afternoon, they visited Brookdale Park for the first time since the incident. The playground had been updated, now featuring accessible equipment and a small plaque that read, "In recognition of those who stand for justice." Ava wheeled over to the plaque, tracing the words with her fingers. "It's perfect," she said, her voice full of emotion. "It is," Malcolm agreed, his eyes misty. "And so are you." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the park, Malcolm and Ava sat together on a bench, watching the children play. The journey they had been on wasn't easy, but it had been worth every step. They had faced challenges, endured setbacks, and stood firm in their beliefs. And through it all, they had discovered the power of resilience, kindness, and hope. The warmth of the spring sun bathed Brookdale Park as Ava and Malcolm watched the children laughing and playing on the new equipment. For the first time in months, there was no tension in the air, no heaviness weighing them down. Instead, there was a feeling of peace and accomplishment. "Do you think people will remember all this?" Ava asked, her voice thoughtful as she traced the edge of the plaque with her fingers. Malcolm smiled, looking at his daughter with pride. "They will," he said, "but even if they don't, what we've done will make it easier for the next kid who comes here. That's what matters." Ava nodded, her face lighting up as she spotted Lily across the playground. Lily waved enthusiastically before running over to join them. "Hey, Ava," Lily said, slightly out of breath. "Did you see? They put up the new swings yesterday. Want to try them out?" Ava hesitated for a moment, glancing at her wheelchair. "I don't know if I can." "Sure you can," Lily said confidently. "I'll help you, and your dad's right here too." Malcolm grinned. "If you want to try, we'll make it work." With Lily's encouragement and Malcolm's steady hands, Ava transferred to one of the new adaptive swings. As soon as she was settled, Lily gave her a gentle push, and Ava's laughter rang out as she swung higher and higher. Malcolm stood back, his arms crossed as he watched his daughter soar, her joy uncontainable. It was a moment of pure freedom, unburdened by the struggles of the past. Ava felt the wind rush past her face, the warmth of the sun on her skin, and the unshakable knowledge that she belonged here just like anyone else. Over the next few weeks, the changes in the community became even more visible. The police department officially adopted new training programs focused on inclusivity and de-escalation. The Oversight Committee began holding monthly public forums, giving citizens a platform to share concerns and ideas. Small steps, but significant ones. Malcolm and Ava continued to attend events and advocate for further reforms, but their lives also began to regain a sense of normalcy. Ava excelled at school, her confidence growing with every project and presentation. She even started a club focused on inclusivity, inviting classmates to join her in brainstorming ways to make their school more welcoming. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter, Ava's teacher, called Malcolm to share some exciting news. Ava's essay has been selected for a statewide competition on social justice, she said. She's going to present it at the Capitol next month. When Malcolm shared the news with Ava, her eyes widened in disbelief. Me? At the Capitol? That's right, Malcolm said, smiling. Your voice is reaching farther than ever, kiddo. The trip to the Capitol was a whirlwind. Malcolm and Ava traveled together, their hearts filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. The grand building, with its towering columns and echoing halls, felt intimidating at first, but Ava quickly found her footing. As she rolled onto the stage to deliver her essay, she looked out at the crowd, a mix of students, teachers, and officials. She took a deep breath and began. Growing up, I never thought my voice would matter, Ava said. But I've learned that even the smallest voice can create ripples that turn into waves. Change starts when we choose to speak up, even when it's hard. Her words were met with a standing ovation, and Malcolm, sitting in the audience, felt his heart swell with pride. Ava wasn't just his daughter, she was a leader, a force for good in the world. Back at home, life settled into a quieter rhythm. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Ava looked up at the stars, her face thoughtful. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think everything we've done will really last? Will it keep making a difference?" Malcolm put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I think the world is a little better because of you, Ava," he said. "And every time someone remembers your story or takes a stand because of what you've done, the change keeps growing." Ava smiled, leaning against him. "I hope so. It will," Malcolm said with certainty. "Because you've shown people what's possible. That's something they'll never forget." In the months and years that followed, the ripple effects of Ava's courage continued to spread. The reforms in their city became a model for others, inspiring similar efforts across the state. Ava's club at school grew into a district-wide program, empowering students to lead initiatives for inclusivity and kindness. Through it all, Ava never stopped speaking up, her voice a steady beacon for those who needed it. And Malcolm, always by her side, knew that their journey, though challenging, had been worth every step. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting warm golden light over the neighborhood, Malcolm and Ava sat together, their hearts full of hope. They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew one thing for certain. They had faced the darkness, brought light to their community, and shown the world the power of resilience, kindness, and love. And that was only the beginning. As the story of Ava and Malcolm Bennett shows us, even in the face of adversity, courage and kindness have the power to spark real change. This journey wasn't just about standing up for Ava, it was about standing up for everyone who deserves dignity and respect. Together, they proved that resilience, unity, and hope can triumph over ignorance and injustice. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with others. Let Ava's bravery inspire more people to stand up for what's right. To hear more stories of resilience, courage, and change, subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Your voice matters, and by joining this community, you can help spread hope and kindness across the world. Let us know in the comments what you think of Ava's story and how it inspired you. Every voice makes a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, together we can create a brighter future.